Here we're going to run our Xamarin Forms app on iOS. So our goal is to execute that iOS head project there inside our Xamarin Forms solution. We have two options. We could run our app directly on a physical iOS device. This requires some setup, and it does require that we have a device available. Let's not assume that we have a device for testing. So instead, we're going to use the iOS simulator. And the simulator is nice because it comes in a lot of different form factors and iOS versions. So it's a nice way to test your app on a comprehensive set of iOS targets. The simulator is part of Xcode. So if a new form factor or iOS version gets released and you want a simulator to test on that, then you just install an update for Xcode to get those new versions. The simulator is always going to be running on your Mac. If you're developing on a Mac, then you have Visual Studio for Mac installed. You can launch the simulator directly from Visual Studio, and the simulator will run right there on the Mac. You'll see a window pop up that lets you view and interact with your app, all contained on the Mac. If you're developing on Windows, you can still get all this to work, and you can drive the entire process from the Windows side. So you have Visual Studio installed on Windows, and when you build your iOS project over there, remember, part of the build process gets delegated to the Mac using the services of the Xamarin Mac agent. And similarly, when you run, part of the execution process is going to be sent over to the Mac. And again, in particular, the simulator is always going to be running on the Mac. So really, the question then is, you're sitting in front of your Windows machine, but the simulator is running on the Mac. So how do you see what's happening? How do you interact with the app? And there's two options. You can always go over to your Mac and look at the screen directly, or you can use the remote view to have Windows display a view of the simulator that's actually running on the Mac, and you can interact with the device, including touch input. So let's show both. Let's go over to our Mac first, use Visual Studio for Mac to run the simulator, and then we'll see how to drive the process from Windows. Here I am on my Mac. The solution here I created using Visual Studio for Mac, so that's why I do not have a UWP project. When I run this, we'll start here in the iOS project on app delegate, and these two lines right here are what forwards control over to the shared Xamarin Forms code. There's the app class, and you can see the constructor sets main page. The templates here on the Mac name this starter page based on the project name, and the user interface should look very familiar. It's just a label with this string. So this is what we should expect to see when we run this app. Up at the top here in this toolbar, we have generic device. So it's set right now to try to run this app on a device rather than the simulator. So I want to drop this down and choose one of the simulator options. So here I'll choose iOS 11 and go ahead and run. So installing on the simulator, and there we see the output. And here I am on Windows. I have the iOS project there set as my startup, and the standard toolbar lets me choose between a device and the simulator. I want simulator. It also lets me choose which simulator to run on. So I'm going to choose, again, the same iOS 11 one we used over on the Mac. The only other thing we need to do is decide where the simulator UI should appear. Under Tools, Options, all the way at the bottom here, Xamarin iOS Settings, this is what controls that. So I can choose to have the simulator viewable on the Mac, or I can choose to have a window open here on Windows that shows me the simulator running on the Mac. And again, it's fully interactive here on Windows, and that's what I'm going to show. It'll do a build, then it'll launch the simulator, install the app. There it is installing, and then there's my splash screen, and there's the start page. So we have the simulator running on the Mac and the user interface being displayed over here on Windows.